Well, hello there, darlings. Thank you very much for being here on this live, for having subscribed to this fabulous channel, naturally. And just that you know already, please be a darling and put down, if you write any comments or questions, right away comments or questions, because I don't have a mod or anything like that who would star that stuff. So that makes it much easier for me, because I do know you guys like to chat amongst yourselves, which is, of course, fabulous. So today I will be talking to Alex Barnes-Ross, who is a YouTuber. He is a protester of Scientology. He's an activist. And we'll be talking about his involvement in Scientology, his protesting that he's done, and, of course, all the work that is behind the scenes. So without any further ado, darlings, do welcome Alex.
Hey!
Hello.
Hey, Sam, how's it going?
Excellent. And yourself?
Good, thank you. A
Marvelous.
European SPTV broadcast. I love it.
Yes, indeed. I'm very excited having more and more European YouTube channel popping up. I'm having tomorrow another interview, and the week after that as well. So I'm really excited. I mean, we do know Scientology is shrinking, but it is spread very thinly across the world, like very much like, jam on toast from your mother who had a bad day, and so she spreads it really thin. Anyway, cringy joke aside. So today we'll be talking about briefly about your involvement. Maybe you want to introduce yourself, how you came about to be a Scientologist. You were also a staff member, how that happened, for anybody who may not know that yet.
Yeah, so hi, I'm Alex. I was the director of public book sales at the Church of Scientology in London, was my official job title. So my job was to recruit people to sell books, to do personality tests and sign people up to their first life improvement course. We'd go out book selling and sell Dianetics, doing stress tests and all that sort of stuff. I joined as a teenager. I was going through a vulnerable time in my life, and Scientology came along and had all the answers and offered hope and meaning and purpose. And why are you feeling so bad? Why do you feel like this is happening to you? Do you feel the whole world is against you? Well, Scientology can help you figure out why. So yeah, it was instantly captured by their promises. And yeah, I'd heard some stuff previously. I'd watched a BBC Panorama documentary that was talking about fair game, and I went in and kind of asked, what do you actually believe? Because the documentary that I saw as a 15-year-old was about the harassment of former members and critics, and all of this press about disconnecting families and stuff. So I went in and said, what do you actually believe in? And also, why do you believe in it so vehemently that you will defend your faith to the point of fair gaming people? You got to remember, this was before the Debbie Cook email or any of that stuff. So the information that was out there was fairly limited in terms. Well, there's lots of information out there, but what I had seen was fairly limited.
Yeah, it was more difficult to combat, of course.
Yeah, I mean, this was a world. I think the iPhone had just come out. It wasn't commonplace. People were still surfing on Blackberries, fiber internet.
Darling, don't show your age.
Fiber internet was only just in a couple of towns in the UK. So, it wasn't by any means the 80s or 90s, but it was still. Anyway, regardless, I was like, look, I was interested to find out what they actually believed in and why they were defending it so viciously, because I'd never seen anything like that before. And they said, well, the best way to find out about Scientology is to read a book, do a course, find out for yourself. And I go, okay, well, what's the harm in that? So I did. And then, next thing you know, I'm on staff. And then I was eventually kicked out and declared a potential trouble source for complaining that Scientology wasn't working. And I was trying to get it to work and tried to do a bit of a handling for a couple of years, and then drifted away. And now I'm an activist, and I've got my YouTube channel. I've got the protest stuff that I've been organizing and working on. I've been meeting with politicians, and I've got a website, scientologybusiness.com, where I write about, investigate the finances and UK operations and all that sort of stuff. So it's a whirlwind of a couple of decades.
Okay, amazing. And how is it, or what happened that you decided, you know what, I'm gonna do this YouTube video? Did something occur, or was it like a number of things that happened and then you said, you know what, now I've had enough, now you're asking for it? Or maybe there wasn't even a confrontation like that, but you just simply decided, okay, now it's time to do this.
For me, I was out for a number of years. I can't remember if it was 8 or 9 or 10 years, but out for a number of years, hadn't set foot in an org for a long time, and had kind of drifted away. I still felt uncomfortable when people mentioned Scientology. Most of my friends didn't know I was even in, and I hadn't really Googled it or anything like that. And I realized that I was still applying Scientology without realizing it. Didn't believe in it, but I was still doing stuff that Scientology had taught me to do in terms of behaviors and thinking and stuff. So I thought, maybe I need to do some digging here and see if there's stuff still affecting me from my time in Scientology, and started going to therapy. And my therapist explained that when you are a child, your brain is still developing its neural pathways, and one of the things that makes Scientology so dangerous is it forms your ways of thinking. And what makes it even more harmful when you're a child is it's really hard to untrain or unpick those neural pathways. Your brain is always developing and growing, but it's a lot more malleable when you're younger, and it stops being so malleable when you're in your mid to late 20s. So when I was a teenager, when I was a kid, and kind of learning how Scientology works and being in the org all day, every day, and doing TRs and doing all the stuff that I was doing, it was forming my neural pathways. And so that was why it was still affecting me years later. Even though I wasn't consciously applying Scientology, I was still thinking in a Scientology way. So started, doing the therapy stuff and digging, and a couple of things happened that led me to start looking into it a lot more seriously and Googling Scientology for the first time. And then I started reading about all of these horrific abuses and the horrible stuff that we've heard about that happens in Scientology around the world, which I wasn't aware of previously. And I thought, well, hang on, there's not much going on in the UK in terms of people speaking out on YouTube and online in present time, to use a Scientology term. There are lots of people who've done it in the past. Pete Griffiths, you have John Atack. Obviously, there are very prominent British ex-Scientologists that have spoken out. I hadn't seen anything in the last 10 years or so of like major significance or online, right? So there'd been occasional press articles and news things, and I thought, well, there's an opportunity here for me to maybe share some of my story, and maybe just hearing a UK voice will help someone else in some way. Just know that you're not alone. There are other British people going through similar things. So I did an interview with Chris Shelton on his channel, and then did a couple of others on other channels, and then started my own channel to literally tell my story and give other people a platform to do the same. And then here we are a year or just over a year later, and it's kind of evolved into being an activist. And I think that change happened around maybe September or so last year, where I decided, instead of just speaking out and sharing my story and having a YouTube channel, but I'm going to start actually proactively investigating and doing what I can as an activist, not just a YouTube creator, I suppose.
Yeah. So this leads us actually beautifully into the first protest that you did. I believe this was the first protest. You did the IAS event, International Association of Scientologists, which is the largest Scientology event that there is in the year, which is always held traditionally at St. Hill. I think for a while it was held in America, but then they decided some years ago, okay, it's going to be always held at St. Hill. And that was the first protest that you organized, was it not?
Yeah, so the IS was formed at St. Hill in the UK, and I'm pretty sure the IS event has always been in the UK, apart from occasional years here and there where it wasn't. 2014, for example, it wasn't, or was it 2013? Can't remember. There was one year when I was on staff that it was over in the States, because it coincided with the new golden age of Tech 2, and all of that was a whole flag Clearwater event. But yeah, it hadn't been held in the UK for a few years because of the pandemic and restrictions and stuff. And so I had a feeling it might be happening last year and was keeping an ear very close to the ground. It normally happens in the first or second week of October,
Yeah,
on the
Australia.
weekend. And I was like, I've not heard any inklings about it happening or anything, but I'm wondering if it will, because normally the tent they do it in a big tent and they start building the tent several weeks
Right.
beforehand.
Yeah.
But there was no sign of that going on. And then suddenly, about 4 weeks before it happened, it ended up being the first weekend of November. 4 weeks beforehand, I got notification that it was happening. I was given a promo piece that Scientology had put out inviting Scientologists to attend the greatest gathering of Scientologists, and there was a lot of hype around it. I thought, wow, so this is happening. Of course, I'm going to protest. It wasn't even a question in my mind. So instantly started organizing what became the largest protest in the UK for 15 years against Scientology.
Yeah. Okay. And you were there for 3 days, because the IS event is always 3 days. And I believe this is also the first time that somebody actually protested for all 3 days.
As far as I'm aware, I mean, I
Mm,
haven't done it before, so I can't speak from first-hand experience, but people
sure.
who had protested at the IES event every year for the last 10, 15 years, they said that normally it's just on the Friday that's the protest happens.
Yeah.
They told me it was the first time that there was a protest across all 3 days, which I was a bit surprised about, because I was like, what, why would you only protest one day? Okay, but you know, it is a dark country lane, it's muddy, it's
Yeah.
horrible, it's not the best time of year, so I understand it. But for
Mm,
me, I was like, well, no, of course I'm going to protest all 3 days. So yeah, set about doing that, and we were there Friday, Saturday, Sunday. There was a really good group of people that came. Most people, the biggest turnout was the Friday, but there was about 10 or 15 of us that stuck it out for the whole 3 days, which I was really impressed with. And you know, couldn't do it without those people. It would be a bit of a what's the word? It wouldn't be a very exciting or effective protest if it was just me standing there with a sign. So I was
yeah.
really you know, overwhelmed with the support and the number of people that showed up.
Yeah. That's awesome. And now you organized it in a way that you also coordinated with the police. You made sure you were able to actually walk down from East Grinstead, which is the town where St. Hill is located at. But St. Hill is a little bit further off. It's about, I think if you walk normally, it's about 20, 25 minutes from East Grinstead town to St. Hill. And you organized it with the police that you are able to actually walk all the way down there to get, of course, as much publicity as possible, that all the cars that come by, they can see the signs that you made, they can see all the protesters. And then, of course, when you were at the gates from of St. Hill, you knew exactly where you were allowed to stand, where you're not allowed to stand. And sometimes security from Scientology came along and pretended that actually you were standing on their ground, even though that wasn't true. That, of course, needs a lot of organization, needs a lot of phone call, emails, and all of that. Can you maybe tell us a little bit about all the work that we don't see that actually is involved in such a thing?
Yeah, it was 4 weeks of intense planning and organization and negotiating with various government bodies. The first, so in the UK, you're allowed to protest. A static protest is allowed to occur anywhere at any time with no notification. And so we could have just rocked up on the day and protested in a static place, and that would have been it.
Right.
However, I wanted, as you say, to do a march, and to organize a march or a moving protest, you have to notify the police 6 weeks beforehand. And I also wanted to march in the road. So I applied to close the road with East Grinstead Town. Well, oh no, it was with Mid Sussex. Initially, so there are 3 tiers of local government. There's East Grinstead Town Council, then there's the Mid Sussex District Council, and then there's West Sussex County Council.
Right.
Obviously, Scientology only announced the event 4 weeks beforehand. So 4 weeks beforehand, the day that I found out, I applied with West Sussex County Council that we closed Saint Hill Road and the main road from the top of that road into town, because I wanted to meet in the centre of town and march, have the road closed, march in the road with our signs and banners, and march all the way down, and then stay static outside Saint Hill. West Sussex County Council came back to me and said that they can't issue the road closure notice because you need at least 6 weeks notice, and there was only 4 weeks. So I had to do it a different way, which was through Mid Sussex District Council, which was through a temporary traffic regulation order, which is a different form of using a special local government power they have to temporarily close roads for usually emergencies or that sort of thing. So I knew of this sort of little, not back alley, but kind of way around it to try and close the road. So applied with them. And then liaised with the police, because the police obviously need to be notified as well. And both of those conversations was interesting, because I said, hey, they were saying, what's the protest for? I said, we're protesting the Scientology event. And they said, what event? At which point I was instantly intrigued, because the license that St. Hill have for their premises, which allows them to hold large scale events, requires them to give the council 6 weeks notice at a minimum before any large scale gathering. So they hadn't obviously done that, which worked in our favor, because that meant the first notification the council got of any sort of event was of the protest, not of the IES event. So immediately we had the upper hand. I tried to use that to my advantage. I said, look, we want to close the road, and we've applied before St. Hill have even applied for their event. So we were given preference, which is great. But there was a lot of back and forth phone calls pretty much every day with the police and with the council to inform them of our plans, how many people are showing up, whether it's likely to turn violent, and all of this. I had a form on my website where people could, I said, look, I don't need information, but the more information I can provide the authorities, the better. And they want to know things like, is the crowd of people going to be violent? Are they all ex-Scientologists that have got a grudge to bear, or are they people who just want to support? So having some like metrics like that, saying no, 90% of the people who were showing up are not former Scientologists, they're just supportive of the cause and have never been in Scientology, that helped put some or put some calm over the situation, to say to the police, look, we're not going to jump the fence, we're not going to be violent, we just want to send a message of compassion. And that was the key thing, is we're not here protesting religious beliefs or whatever. We're here just to send a message to say, look, if you choose to leave, there is a community of people here to help you. So that's what our signs were very much focused on. And there were also signs focused on raising awareness with public around the local area that Scientology is a harmful movement. So yeah, there was a lot of liaison with the police and so on about that. And then there was a lot of back and forth with the road closure, because the main reason I wanted to close the road was for safety, right? If we have 50 people walking down a very narrow street and it's a country lane, the St. Hill Road itself doesn't have a sidewalk or anything. It's not very safe to have all these people walking in the road without closing it. So the idea of closing the road was not because we want to cause disruption to their event, but because there's going to be a lot of us, and I want to make sure that everybody is safe. So I had to make sure that there were safety precautions in place. We all had high-vis jackets and lights and all of this sort of stuff when it got dark. And in the end, we were actually given a police escort. So they didn't close the road in the center of town. But as soon as we got to the top of St. Hill Road, we were put into a little holding area. And then I had a meeting with the police officer and explained where we wanted to go. And they drove a van very slowly in front and behind us with the blue lights on to close the road officially and stopped all the traffic, to make sure that we had our moment where we could walk past the gates of St. Hill with our signs and chants and banners. And it made it into the press, which was kind of what we wanted to do, really, in the first place.
Yeah, awesome. Wow. Yeah, there's a lot of organization. And is it true that there were well, is it true? I remember you talking about that Saint Hill, or rather Scientology, OSA, they were trying to say, oh, actually, telling the police, oh, actually they can't, and then the police is telling you, actually, no, it's not possible, and then only because you said, well, actually, wasn't it okay, and then they found out, oh, actually, yes, you're right, it is okay. And then there was also a little problem with the car parking that
Don't even, yeah.
uh,
So just on the first one, with this
yeah.
is to do with the road closure. So
Mm-hmm.
I had applied for a permit to close the road, and it was granted, and so we had permission to close the entire road. And what that would have entailed was getting volunteers to stand at either side, because there's one road that connects to two roads. There's only two
Right.
ways onto it. Standing with a sign, and because we want to make sure that people have access, if you live on the road, or if you're part of the rugby club or sports club that was nearby, we can't prevent people accessing their property or the event at St. Hill. So but we wanted to make sure that traffic was minimized and it wasn't speeding past at 60 miles an hour, so that we as protesters were safe on the side of the road. So we had a whole plan in place to get volunteers to do that, and all of the attendees at the IES event were forced to be given permits that they could display in their car. So Scientology had to make these just because of us, permits, and they were shipped out ahead of time. And if you were driving to the event, you had to display the permit so that the volunteers at the end of the road could wave them on and say, yep, you're going to the event, on you go. And we would then escort the cars in sort of like groups of 5 or 10 or whatever at a walking pace, so that it's, safe for everybody.
Right.
However, a couple of days beforehand, I got notification from the police court, because I was having daily meetings with the chief superintendent and chief inspector of West Sussex Police, and they said, oh, there isn't a road closure in place. So then I had to call the council again and say, no, I've got the certificate here that says it's closed. And what Scientology had done is thrown a spanner in the works and tried to claim that the road closure was for their event, not for the protest, because it wasn't very clear on the certificate that it was for the protest and not for the event. And so then I got notification that it was all not happening, it was all cancelled. And the morning of the event, I got a phone call from the council and confirmation from the police that no, we have been granted a road closure. And not only was it granted until 8 p.m, which is when I wanted it to be closed until, it was actually extended to 10 p.m. For extra safety and security. But by that point, it was too late to put in place the volunteers to move all the traffic
on either end.
Actually, we then opted as protesters to not close the road on the day and just have a temporary closure for the time we were marching in the road. So the road was closed as we were escorted down to the site, and then it was reopened, and then it was closed again and as we escorted off the site. And that was done with the help of the police, which is very kind of them to do, instead of closing the entire road. Now, what that meant was the traffic situation was entirely in Scientology's arms, and one of the main complaints that local residents had from that day was how horrible the traffic situation was, because there were thousands of cars trying to get onto this property. Nobody could get anywhere. There was no one that wanted to get to the rugby club for their jabs and stuff, because it was flu season. It caused major disruption to the local area, and Scientology tried to blame it on us, on the protesters. And I issued a statement back saying, no, actually, look, if we had it our way, the traffic situation would have been managed a lot better, because we had a whole system in place to make sure that people weren't prevented from accessing the local resources and their homes and all this sort of stuff. So it's all Scientology's fault for messing with the protest that this traffic situation has affected the local area, which was just kind of funny. But yeah, and then your question about the parking situation, I had negotiated with the local sports club to use their toilet facilities if any of the protesters need to use the loo while we were there. And also built a relationship with the rugby club, which is directly opposite St. Hill, and agreed that we could use their car park for parking, so that we, didn't have to, for those who were driving, didn't have to park on a narrow side of the road. And we were allowed to park there on the first day, but then the second day, Scientology had taken over the car park and the rugby club was closed. So there was nobody on site that would allow
Mm.
us to use the car park, even though we had permission. And then by the third day, we found out that the rugby club had withdrawn their prior consent for us to use the car park
Right.
because it had caused so much strain between their relationship with St. Hill. And they said, look,
Mm.
we don't want to cause unnecessary problems with our neighbours across the road. And
Sure.
by allowing protesters to park in our car park, it's caused a lot of backlash. So
Mm.
unfortunately, we can't let you do that. But luckily, the police allowed us to park on the side of the road. There's a grass verge along the whole perimeter of the property.
Yeah.
And they were moving traffic out of the way. Scientologists were trying to park there to stop us having a safe space to protest. And the
Right.
police were
Right.
saying, move, no, we're using this for something else now. You can't park here, which is very
Mm.
great of them. And I've got a
Yeah.
massive respect and thanks to the Sussex police for helping us out with that.
Yeah. And the police was there for the whole time?
Yeah, we had. So I had a
Okay.
meeting every morning with the inspector or the chief who was in the area.
Mm.
I was having liaison for several weeks with the top guy at Sussex Police, the
Mm.
commissioner or whatever the title is.
Yeah.
And then he then assigned someone to look after the whole situation. And
Right.
then there was a different person on site every day who
Mm.
was in charge of just looking after us. So there were, on the first day, a handful of police officers, and every day there were at least 3 police officers who were there
Great.
stationed
Yeah.
on site to make sure that we were safe and looking after us and making sure that Scientology weren't playing any stupid games, which they did
Yeah.
eventually do, which is quite funny.
Of course. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it was to be expected almost. So this was the first event, the first protest that you organized, and then the
Yeah.
next one, I believe, was the one for LRH's birthday event, March 13 in London.
Yeah, that's right. So March
The
13th is a
cake
big,
gate.
yeah, cake gate. Yeah.
Yeah.
Again, LRH's birthday is a big celebration in Scientology's calendar every year. And
Mm.
I knew that there would be an event and it would be organized and shown at every single Scientology org. But March 13th itself was, I think it was a Wednesday. So I was
Right.
like,
Of
well,
course.
let's go and show them how how great life is without LRH. You know, while
Mm.
they're celebrating LRH's birthday, let's celebrate life without him, and just have a party and show
Mm.
them exactly how we can have fun and we can be happy and we can
Yeah.
we're not one covertly hostile,
Mm.
and we're just out here having fun. And again, send a message to my fellow former colleagues at London Org that we're thinking about them. You know, we had one sign that was tomorrow at 2 we'll be thinking of you, because the
Mm.
stats the weekends at 2 o'clock on a Thursday. So
Right.
again, just sending a message that we're here and we want to support them, and we're not the big bad nasty horrible SPs you may think we are. So yeah, went in with a cake and delivered it, and it was promptly dropped on the floor and stepped on outside
Yeah.
the org. But again, that was, even though it was a static protest, so I didn't need to close the road or anything, I did have liaison with the police beforehand
Mm.
to make sure that they're aware, hey, look, this is what we're going to do, this is what our intentions are, this is what it's going to look like, and build that relationship so that when Scientology call them up and say these protesters are trying to break into the building, the police already have an understanding of that not being what we're there to do.
Right.
And so it actually makes the whole situation work a lot smoother, because you have a
Of course.
contact and you've kind of
Yeah.
prepped them and they know what to expect. And part of that preparation is, and just to let you know, Scientology will try and claim we're being violent and all of this and all of that. And I just
Mhm.
want to make you aware that that will happen, and
Right.
I can guarantee you that that's not what we're there to do.
Yeah.
So that kind of relationship building thing was really important beforehand.
Yeah. Awesome. And I believe after that you went up north with Danielle.
Yes, Danielle
Yeah.
Chamberlain, who's in the chat. Hi, Danielle.
Yes,
She's
indeed.
awesome. Um, Yeah, up in Sunderland, there was a fundraising event happening
Hmm.
at a building that was owned by Sunderland City Council. And, Danielle and I kind of raised the question of like, hey, why Scientology have a history of fraud internationally that's
Right.
proven by lawsuits and
Hmm.
legal cases. Scientology have been found guilty of fraud on more than one occasion in France.
Mm.
Recently, they were convicted or charged and convicted with organized fraud in Hungary. It
Hmm.
is legal fact that this organization commits fraud
Yeah.
internationally. And although there aren't any UK convictions of fraud, it's still the same organization and they're
Right.
operating with the same policies. So we asked the council, why do you think it's appropriate that Scientology are holding a fundraising event in your building? And secondly, what are you doing to make sure that that fundraising that is taking place isn't being done fraudulently?
Mm.
And obviously, they just issued a statement saying anyone can use our building, and all of this is kind of very wishy-washy, but
Yeah.
wanted to have a bit of a presence. So we showed up and live streamed. There were only 3 of us there. It wasn't a huge protest, nothing on the scale of the other ones. But it was just important to have a presence and
Sure.
see what was going on at the
Of
city
course, and
level.
also that the locals see that, because
Yes.
they didn't necessarily know this was going on, that there was a Scientology event happening there, and I'm assuming maybe you had maybe a couple of people who maybe came up and say, "Oh, what's this? What are you doing? What is this
Yeah.
all about?" Yeah.
Absolutely. I think that's the thing. There are lots of different types of protests with different messages and different
Sure.
purposes and different objectives. And, people protesting in LA, for example, and, going to orgs and live streaming every day. That's fantastic. And I think that's one of many different types of protests. There isn't a
Mhm.
right or wrong way to do it.
Sure.
I've organized specific protests that are targeting specific events
Mhm.
where there's going to be high footfall and lots of people going in for a specific purpose. So they have a very specific message, and that sort of protest requires a lot of planning and organization, like we just discussed. But
Yeah.
there's nothing stopping people just showing up every day outside their local org
Of
and live
course.
streaming and
Yeah.
trying to raise awareness with people walking past. Hey,
Mhm.
this is a cult. This is a coercive group. These people are
Yeah.
going to extort you for money. It's a dangerous organization.
Mhm.
And that sort of protest is far easier to organize because you don't need to inform the police, build a relationship with the council, close a
Yeah.
road. You can just show up and live
Mhm.
stream. And that's
Mhm.
fantastic. And I think that more people should be doing that, especially here in the UK.
Mhm.
The difficulty is there's less people in the UK. There's less
Sure.
Scientologists. There's also less ex-Scientologists. And
Mm.
the orgs in the UK are so spread out. Um, the number of people local to an org that are active and have engaged in anti-Scientology protests before here is much smaller. So it's, I think, a lot easier to get everyone together for one event and go, right, we
Right.
need everyone to be here for the IES event, and a
Mhm.
big group of people show up. That was kind of that's what I did back in October, November. But I think everybody should show up and protest outside all their orgs because it stops
Mhm.
people walking in and it promotes to the local community that this is a harmful organization.
Absolutely. And to anyone who wants to do this sort of thing, do make sure that you also just have a quick look. What are the laws? What are the sort of things you can do? And uh, for example, in America, I know they like to write things with chalk on the road, which I think is a brilliant idea because it's not really vandalism because you can just wash it up with water, so that's not a problem, right? As such,
Well, I think again it depends on where you're based. So all of this
right?
stuff is
That's what
stuff
I
I
mean. Yeah.
looked into last year
Mm.
ahead of the protest, is like what we're allowed to do and what we can't look at, what we can't do. And I looked into whether we could do chalk drawings outside
Hmm.
St. Hill, and it was so tricky because if it's on private property
Hmm.
here in the UK, it could be considered vandalism.
Right.
But they would have a tough time proving it because it can be washed off. But the
Right.
difficulty is if you don't wash it off yourself, they could damage the property in cleaning it off with the inappropriate cleaning solution or whatever,
Mm.
and
Okay.
therefore they could claim that you've caused the damage to the property. So it's a lot more for it's writing on a pavement with chalk. It's something that should be allowed. It's stupid, but it's a lot more nuanced legally than you would expect it to be in the
Yeah.
UK. City of London, for example, is run as a whole separate government thing to the rest of London, and that's all technically private land, even if it's not owned by the church. The actual outside land is owned by the City of London. There's lots of different rules and regulations. So my advice would be, firstly, don't ever show up alone. Don't go
Right.
protesting without someone else there with you, so that you have backup and you feel safe, and also you have a witness, because there's
And
nothing
preferably them
stopping.
also filming. Maybe they're
Yes,
not live streaming or anything like that. They're not a YouTuber. They're just
film it.
filming you
Yeah.
and any engagement that there is between yourself, and another person, right? Yeah.
Exactly. That's the thing, is having a witness and having
Mm.
evidence. Because if a
Yeah.
Scientologist, if you're live streaming and you've got a friend with you, and a Scientologist or someone comes and knocks the phone out of your hand and
Right.
then punches you, then
Yeah.
you have no evidence that they've done that to you, and they
Mm.
could claim that you started it and therefore you're in trouble. So it's
Of course.
important to have someone external. This is another thing that I tried to do for the protests that I've organized, was there are independent observers. There's like a community of volunteers who go
Okay.
along to watch protests, and they're there to just observe and make
Mm.
sure that no one's breaking the law, and
Mhm.
record a detailed report of everything, so that if there is any police corruption or anyone steps over the line, there's an
Right.
independent body of people there to do that. So I try to engage those people at these protests
Mhm.
as well. Obviously, they're not going to show up if it's not a large protest, if it's one or two people outside an org, but it's something
Yeah.
that you have to consider. So yeah, make sure you don't go alone. You've got someone recording with you, and make sure you're familiar with the laws and
Mhm.
regulations in the local area.
Yeah.
That includes knowing where their property line is, because even though trespassing is a civil offence, what you can and can't get away with on private property is different to public property, and the rights
Sure.
are slightly different with regard to protesting and all of this. So
Mm.
make sure you're very clued up on where you are, what the rules are, and as long as you're equipped with those things, go for it. Like,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Totally. Wow. You've been a busy bee.
Absolutely.
Now you've been part of Scientology, of course. You work for Scientology,
Mm.
and you came away with it with traumatic, traumatic. Help me out, Alex. You know what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
Traumatizing. There we go. Traumatizing experiences, and how. I mean, how is that? How was that for you to confront your abuser, so to speak, by
Mm.
having done this first protest, right? Going there, uh, also with the fear that you might fear or uncertainty that you might actually meet somebody or see somebody that you actually knew back
Mm.
when you were a Scientologist. Like, what are the feelings behind that, the thought process? Then how was it when you first marched, when you first shouted, when you first were out there, and then at the end of that, how was the whole
Mm.
uh, feeling ride, if you want to call it, for you?
Yeah. Saint Hill was interesting because obviously I never worked at Saint Hill. I was at London
Mm.
Org, but I had visited, so I was aware of Saint Hill and I'd been there. But I didn't have any horrible traumatic experiences at Saint Hill. So I kind of went into it thinking that it would be okay and whatever. It's just, it's a protest, and I'll see some people that I recognize. However,
Mm.
in the moment, it was quite cathartic and quite a release, because I'd never been in a situation before where I could stand outside the headquarters of Scientology and shout whatever I wanted to shout, and get
Mm.
whatever message that I wanted to get across to them. And I knew that they were listening, because there were OSA people following us around all day, filming us
Mm.
and recording us.
Mm.
And whether or not they actually listen, whether they heard, is a different story. But just
Sure.
getting it out and into the public sphere, I suppose, was quite cathartic. The Sunday was, um, I think the Sunday affected me emotionally more than I anticipated, because that's when they got a lot more aggressive. They were pushing us into the road, into
Right.
oncoming traffic, and they were
Right.
physically moving us away and getting a bit more aggressive. And that riled me up more than I thought it would.
Yeah.
And I definitely had my TRs in a little bit, but ultimately I was like, I didn't get angry, but I definitely got more upset than I thought I would do. But the thing that really hit me emotionally was the March 13th protest, because
Right.
that was all of my former friends. And I saw Charlie, who was, previously my best mate in Scientology, and we used to go out book selling every day, and seeing all of these people that I know so well and spend all day every day with for a substantial period of time, to see them look at me as the enemy. It's hard to
Right.
describe, but that look in their eye was different.
Yeah.
Last time I saw these people, they looked at me as if I was a friend that had done something wrong. I was in ethics trouble, but I was still a friend.
Yeah.
And the next time I see them, they're looking at me as if I'm the worst human being on the planet, that I'm evil, that, I need to be destroyed. That was emotional, and I didn't expect it to be so.
Right.
Because I've been talking out online for so long, and well, I say so long, it's a year, it's nothing in comparison to other people.
Yeah.
But I've been speaking out for a year, and I felt like, cool, I've said what I need to say, and I'm comfortable and confident in saying whatever message I want to get across through written word on my blog and through YouTube. But standing there face to face with people you once knew, that was hard. That was different.
Yeah, of course. And talking of your YouTube channel, I've got here a lovely little banner. One moment. Very professional here. There we go. So this
Ah,
is Alex's YouTube channel for anyone
thanks.
who hasn't subscribed yet, or you know. So yes, that's that. Right. So I've started a couple of comments. Do we want to pick those up?
Absolutely. Let's go for
All
it.
right, let's go for it, darlings. So we have one from Danielle Chamberlain. Hello there, darling. Question to Alex and Samuel. I'd be interested to know if there was one single thing that made it harder for you to leave, leave more than anything else.
And a single thing that made it harder for you to leave more than anyone else. I think that everybody has their own experience in leaving, and everybody is different. Some people who were raised in Scientology, who didn't have a say in joining, sometimes they just decide one day, that's it, I'm out, I've been driven over the edge, and they are completely out in their mind, and that's that. Some people who have been in Scientology take a lot of time to get over it, and just decide that the Church of Scientology is the organization that's wrong, and actually they still believe in Scientology as a principle, and become independent.
Right.
Whereas some people have physical barriers, being locked in rooms and thrown in the hole, and behind, like, for example, at St. Hill, there's motion sensors along the entire perimeter of the property. And at Gold, there are high fences with barbed wire and stuff. Like, you physically cannot leave the property. So
Yeah.
everybody's experience is different. So I don't think that you can really compare and say one person had a harder time than another, because even though I had no physical barriers to leaving the organization, I still had mental barriers. And for
Sure.
me,
Of
it
course.
took years to realize and come to terms with it and drift away. And I would still defend, like, 18 months, 2 years ago, I would still defend Scientology, even though I wasn't considering myself a Scientologist. And
Right.
it's only in the last year that has changed.
Mm.
So very long-winded way of answering your question, Danielle, but I don't think there is a harder or easier scale. I think everybody is different, and those challenges present themselves in different ways.
Mm. For me, I would have to answer this question twice, in a sense, because I was actually working for Scientology as a SEOG member. And then the thing that made me really not want to leave is the fear of, well, the fact that I didn't have a proper schooling. I went to regular school until I was 10 years old. And then from 10 to 13, I went to a Scientology schools in Switzerland, which is where I'm from originally. And then with 13, I joined the SEOG. So I didn't have any proper schooling. And I knew in the normal world, if you haven't even completed your basic schooling, or that's what I thought anyway, you couldn't, like this, you can't do anything. You can't get a job. You can't do anything. And then if you want to repeat those lost years so that you have a certificate, well, where are you going to get the money from to be able to pay for the school? Where are you going to live in the meantime? Like how is that going to work? And I was, of course, also fearful of the world outside, because all my life I was told that either you're a Scientologist, and if you're not a Scientologist, then you're probably a drug addict. You are somehow in conflict, in war. You're corrupt. You're a thief, and all of that. So I was afraid, just generally speaking, of the world outside. But I was in a situation where I was forced out, so I left. I wasn't a SEAL anymore, but I was still a Scientologist. And then the thing that sort of kept me not wanting to look on the internet and not wanting to figure out, okay, what is actually Scientology, because it has never made me happy, right? I think that was the fear of knowing that all these years, I believed a lie, to sort of admit that you were fooled in a way. And also the implication of that, to realize what it actually is, that perhaps there are certain emotions that might come up, something will happen, and then your family will not ever not talk to you ever again. So I was almost like, I knew that might happen, but I just almost like, it's almost like a bill that you get, and you just move it from desk to desk to desk. You don't want to open, because you don't even want to know what the bill is for. You know it's a bill. You have to pay for it eventually, but right now you just don't want to have that problem. But it's there, and that was for a number of years. That was sort of what kept me from wanting to actually have a look.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think Danielle also clarifying not anyone else, anything else. And I think, yes, the similar thing to what you were saying was doubt, right? For me, in terms of anything else, is the doubt, like, what if it was all wrong? Or what if it was right? That back and forth in my mind for many years. It took me a very long time to seek professional help and see a therapist, or even speak to a doctor about my mental health, and then let alone getting a prescription, and then confronting the idea of taking an antidepressant, and then actually taking one, and again going to see a therapist. The getting to the point where I was comfortable admitting that that's something I may possibly benefit from in some small way, to then seeing a therapist, to then being comfortable enough to open up. That whole process was just filled with doubt of, like, what if there is a part of what Scientology told me that isn't right or is correct, or you're taught that psychiatrists and therapists and mental health professionals are all out to get you, and they're the enemy and the devil. And so for me, even though I wasn't considering myself a Scientologist, I still had that doubt in my mind of, like,
what
maybe
if they're right?
What if they're right? Yeah. And
Right.
that was quite hard mentally for me.
Yeah. Or of the 10 things that they say, maybe one of these things is right, and it happens to be that.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Yeah, totally. I totally get that. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you, Danielle, for that fascinating question. Right. Here we have another one from Elise21. Question: how do you think you were saving the world? As a never-in, they do nothing to help mankind. Even the front groups are scams. Enjoy you both. Big hugs from Canada. Yes, and I believe what is meant by that is because when you're in Scientology, you're convinced. Well, of course, you are in Scientology to help yourself, your own spiritual well-being, to raise your own spiritual level, so to speak, but also you get told that it is your responsibility, now that you have this holy knowledge, so to speak, to spread it far and wide, and make sure that everybody gets onto this, so we can save the planet. The planet is, we're all dying, it's full of corruption, and only Scientology can heal that. So everybody has their own way of thinking, I suppose, of what I did to save the planet. How was that for you? I mean, did you think about that even? And
yeah, I think a thing to remember is that Scientology lies to the world, but also to its members, right? If you are a Scientologist, you are told that what you are doing is helping mankind.
Yeah.
You know, Elise here is saying they do nothing to help mankind. Well, that's because you're an outsider looking in. You know, to anyone in the normal world, you can quite clearly see that Scientology does more harm than good. But when
Yeah.
you're in Scientology, the information is controlled. You're not party to that information. The only information you're getting is being given by the Church of Scientology, and they are telling you at all these big events every year that they handed out thousands of way to happiness booklets
Mm.
in Portland, and the next day the rioting stopped.
Right.
Therefore, Scientology has stopped the rioting, and Scientology has helped, and therefore
Mm.
it's made the world a slightly better place.
Yeah.
Yes, it's true they handed out booklets, and yes, it's true a day or two later the rioting stopped. But it's not true that the rioting stopped because of the booklets being given out.
Right.
But you don't know that because in Scientology you're being fed lies and misinformation. So when
Mm.
you're in, you do genuinely believe that you are saving the world. And all of this press about Scientology is called black PR. Is just all these evil people who are trying to shut down Scientology because their goal is to destroy the planet, and
Mm.
Scientology is the only thing that is helping the planet. So
Right.
therefore, they're going to try and shut it down as viciously as they can because it's, you know, challenging their authority and power.
Mm.
That's what you believe in Scientology. So even though the statistics and the data and the information is there, you're not party or privilege to that information when you're in Scientology.
Yeah. You're absolutely right. And I remember when I was working for Scientology as a SIG member, I mean, I didn't have an important, well, I would say I wasn't high up anywhere. I was just the cook for the staff, which of course is important, but I wasn't like anyone important in the sense that
Yeah, without you, everyone would starve, Sam. That's a pretty
absolutely.
important job, if you ask me.
Yeah, in that way it is important, but I wasn't like up there an executive or anything like that. So I always thought myself as more like a cog, a little screw in the machine, a little drip of oil to help the people above me to help them clear the planet, so
Mm,
to speak. I didn't see myself as directly doing anything to clear the planet, but I saw myself as this drop of oil in the machine to help it make happen. But I didn't say to myself, okay, well, if I'm not, let's see, my senior, no, he wouldn't know. His senior, no, wouldn't I, that no, that either. I didn't go up there until I finally got to a point where I'm like, okay,
mm.
this person is clearly doing something for the planet.
See, that's really interesting, Sam, because my experience is so different. You know, I was out on the front lines selling books, and there are countless policies in which L. Ron Hubbard makes it explicitly clear that book selling is the number one most important activity in an org, right?
Right.
Is dissemination, is book selling, is getting books into hands of
Mm,
the public. And
mm,
so from day one, it was you are doing the most important thing you can do in an org, which is getting new people in and selling books. Books make booms, right? Is
right.
literally the name of a policy.
Yeah.
So I guess my experiences are different because I always felt like I was doing something that was directly having an impact, because
Yeah.
even if I sold one book, that's one potential person whose life I could potentially have saved.
Absolutely.
I
Yeah.
can't remember the number. I think it was like 20 or 25 books makes a Scientologist. So I knew
Okay.
that I was
Mm,
directly having an impact on the planet.
yeah.
But I never thought to look at the scale and think, hey, we're selling 200 books a week. There are 8 million people in in London. There are 80 million people in the UK. I
Mm,
might be slightly off with those numbers, but roughly,
yeah.
it's going to take lifetimes to clear the planet at this rate. We're
Yeah.
making no difference whatsoever.
Yeah.
That didn't even cross my mind when I was in.
Yeah. Of course not. Let alone how many children, babies are born every day, and so on and so forth. On top of
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, because in my mind, I was like, look, it doesn't really matter as long as I'm making some difference. I'm doing
Yeah.
something. It
Yeah.
doesn't really matter what it is, as long as it's something and it's a small little impact, then
Mm,
it's good and it's worth it.
yeah. All right. Here's a question from Lenny G. Question: is it worth protesting outside places like Criminon? My local org is in an awkward place, but Criminon is on a busy road.
Yeah, I think it's worth protesting anywhere, at any time. I think there's no wrong way to protest. I think everyone should protest in whatever way they think is most effective and where they think is most effective with whatever message they think is right. There isn't a
Sure.
right or wrong way to protest. In terms of Criminon, yeah, I think I'm actually working on something to do with Criminon. So watch this space with more
Right,
information about
darlings.
that soon. But yeah, I think it's what I would just advise thinking about the message, right? Like if, for
Right.
example, you want Scientology's tax exemption to be revoked in the US, I would suggest that protesting outside the IRS might be more effective than protesting outside an org, because the people who can decide whether Scientology is tax exempt or not are going to be working at the IRS. They're not going to be in a Scientology building. So if that's your message, protest outside the IRS. If you want to stop people walking into an org and saying, hey, it's a cult, don't join, then protesting outside an org is going to be more effective than protesting outside the IRS. So it's just thinking about what your message is and what you're
Sure.
trying to achieve, and then trying to figure out what's the most effective way of doing that. And there isn't a rule book or a guide. You do what you think is right. So with Criminon, yeah, again, if you're protesting outside the Criminon building, you have to look at, okay, is it actually being used? There's a Criminon building in the UK in East Grinstead that I'm pretty sure it's not even used. It's just an empty building. So if you're trying to get at the people who are working at Criminon, is it not more effective maybe to look at the prisons that Criminon are operating in, and maybe getting in touch with the prison officers or the people who are delivering the Criminon course there? Or is it more effective to go a step higher and protest outside the head office of His Majesty's Prison Service or whatever? I don't know. I'm just throwing ideas out there.
Sure.
Look at what you're trying to achieve with your protest and then filter it back from that. Okay, how are you going to do it? But ultimately, that's a lot of planning and a lot of thinking. I think, the most effective way is just get out there and do something. Go outside and go to an org or protest online. Commenting and liking and sharing all that stuff online is a form of activism. Sharing stuff on social media is just as effective and helpful in this fight as standing outside an org live streaming. I think every way of getting involved in this fight has merit and has value.
Yeah, absolutely. Or for example, if you're not ready to actually be out there or anything like that because of whatever reason, perhaps you're walking along town and you see a Scientology stand for giving out free stress tests, or a bunch of Scientologists selling books. Maybe make a picture of that and then send it to a YouTuber that you like and show that to them and inform them, and then they can make a video about it. Oh, look, I have someone, a subscriber of mine. They showed this, happening here and there, and so on and so forth. And in that way, sort of give out, do the protest in that way, so you can remain completely anonymous, and you don't have to actually go there and protest physically if you're perhaps not ready to do that or whatever.
Yeah, like there are a lot of people who maybe are disabled or who don't have the ability to get to somewhere to protest. Or there might be people who have mental health struggles who aren't ready to go out and do something in the public realm. Or there might be people who simply don't want to protest in person. Like, that's fine.
Right.
Activism has many forms, and just commenting on Twitter or X, or sharing something on Instagram, or liking something on TikTok, social media, all of that is a form of activism, and it all helps. The more ways people get involved, the better. And I would suggest, if you're not near an org or you're not able to go out protesting for whatever reason, join in online, share news articles, share people's videos, get engaged in the comments, all that sort of stuff. It's not just a growth and algorithm thing. It's because it's a form of getting involved in that activism, regardless of where you live or who you are.
Yeah, totally. All right, I've got here another comment from Danielle. Comment: ask Alex, but I get really triggered at the idea of stepping into an org and no, fuck off, Osa. It's nothing to do with non-confront. Right. It's I think she's saying that it's so difficult for somebody who actually worked at the org, like for example when you worked at London, to actually go there to actually, you know, do that, because of course of all the memories you've had,
Mm.
of course, working with the people, it's usually the same old people there. And yeah.
Yeah, I was shaking. Like when I went into London or to deliver the cake, I was there for a matter of seconds. But
Yeah.
just the smell of the build, you know how buildings
Gosh,
have
yeah.
smells? Like
Yes.
first time I'd smelt that building in so
Mm.
long and just being in that building, it was really tricky. I came out, I was shaking, like, I needed to take a minute before
Yeah.
to process what just happened. And that was just walking in the reception,
Mm.
seeing people in the flesh, in the real world that I hadn't seen for so long. It does take its toll. And like Danielle's saying, it's not to do with non-confront. It's valid. Mental health is a real thing, and
Right.
these things affect people in different ways. And I would just advise you take all the time and space you need.
Mm.
And if you feel yourself getting triggered, take a step back, just breathe for a minute. No
Sure.
one's forcing you to go into the building or do whatever. Like, you just follow your instincts and what you think is right.
Mm.
And there's a community of people here to help each other. Like when I protested on March 13th, like I felt so supported by the people who were there with me protesting. None of them were ex-Scientologists. They were all people who watch on YouTube and people who follow my blog and all of this stuff. Like, they genuinely, I felt so like they had my back. And when we
Mm.
went for a beer afterwards, I was overwhelmed with that love of like them saying, no, look, we're here for you as well as the message, and
Yeah.
we got to help each other and support each other. And that sense of community is really important to help get through it, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. And I haven't done any protesting yet, but I remember watching the protest that you did on the IS event, and the first couple of days was already quite. I felt very anxious, as though I was there, as though they could somehow see me
Mm,
through your phone. You know what I mean? They could look at me, the Scientologists or
mm,
whatever. And then on the third day, where there was a bit more confrontation, and then there was the security chief. His name is Luca. He came
mm,
actually out and spoke to you. I had such a knot in my stomach because I
mm.
knew him. I knew him. I even, as I recall, I baked a birthday cake for him or for his wife while I was there, right?
Wow.
So, um, so just, I mean, seeing that, I had such a knot, and it was so difficult to confront, even just to watch this.
Mm.
So, um, this leads me to another question, which is, uh, oh,
I was just going to say very briefly on that. I think
yeah,
it's different, like when you have personal experience and when you don't, of that particular place. Like when I was in
sure,
Vegas recently, I had no issue walking up to the org and, like no problem at all, because I don't have any personal connection with that building. So
mm,
I'm not going to run into someone that I recognize or know or anything like that. And because it was slightly removed, it was easier for me.
sure,
But at London org, it was a lot more triggering because
of
it's somewhere
course,
I used to work and know everyone.
right,
So I would suggest, I walked into Sunderland org with Jeff, PTS for life. He was
mm,
like, let's go. And I felt very like uncomfortable, but like, he was like, let's do it. So I was like, okay, fine. And we did it. And afterwards I was like, wow, I don't even know what to think about that. But
yeah,
I think it was easier because I didn't know anyone. I didn't have any knowledge or experience in that building.
mm,
So yeah, I think it's locational as well, based on your experience.
sure. And I was gonna ask you, have you already thought about or considered of organizing, or if not organizing, being part of a protest for the IS event this year?
We started planning the 2024 IES protest the moment last year's ended.
Right. Wow.
There have been plans in place since November,
Mm,
and I'm currently hard at work to try and get it to the place where it can be bigger and better than last year.
mm,
But we have to hold tight for a little while because Scientology haven't announced the date, and they won't do until much nearer the time.
right.
We don't know whether it'll be the first or second weekend of October, or whether they'll
Mm,
push it back to November again like they did last year,
yeah.
or whether they pull the plug and move the whole thing over to Florida, which they have done in the
Goodness.
past.
Yeah. Yeah.
I doubt it. I'd be surprised if they do.
Mm,
But I'm doing as much planning and preparation as I possibly can
yeah.
now, but we got to hold fire for a little bit. But yes, preparation is already happening. I've already had a couple of meetings with local government officials about our plans for this year.
Yeah. I don't know if you're aware of this or if this helps you in any way, this information, but when I was working at St. Hill, the IS event was always on the weekend, where on the Sunday there's a time change.
Yes. Yeah.
And I remember sort of, I don't know if I asked why is that, or I sort of comment on that, and I was informed it's because of the patron ball, so that people sort of can party for an hour longer, or they can sleep in an hour longer, so to speak. So I don't
Crazy.
know.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's good to know that that is a potential weekend, but as we've seen last year, pretty much every weekend is a potential one because it was pushed back so far.
Yes, exactly. So we can't get going with announcing the protest
Of
until they've
course.
announced the event.
Yeah.
However, there are plans in place, and I will give people as much notice as I possibly can. But in the meantime, like please go and protest outside your local org. Like, don't wait for me to organize something.
Yeah, of
Like
course.
anyone and
Yeah.
everyone can and should protest.
Yeah, absolutely. Right, I've got here a little comment, which is, "Hi, Sam and Alex from Scientology up north. I'll be
Those
doing
guys are great.
Yes, they're great. I'll be doing tomorrow an interview with her,
Oh,
which
amazing.
I'm very excited for. Yes, I love to talk to people. Yeah, more in Europe, in the UK, obviously in America too. But there's so many people there that I'm just so happy that now there are more and more people doing protests and having channels in Europe.
This is one thing to note, actually, is what we were saying earlier about knowing the regulations. I was watching one of their live
Right.
streams the other day, and they said something about the rules in Denmark about protesting, and so they weren't allowed to officially protest, but they were and engage with people on the street. But what they could do is live stream and watch everything, because of some rule in Denmark about live streaming and protesting. And so that's just a really good example of know the laws and the rules and regulations in your area, so that you don't overstep the mark and do something illegal. If you're not allowed to protest, okay, what are you allowed to do? Can you live stream? Can you just watch and observe? Can you hand out flyers and leaflets? Is that something that is considered protesting, or is that distribution? Look at what you can and can't do, and these guys, Scientology up north over in Denmark, have done that, and that's a really good thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Right, Alex.
Sam,
would you like to say anything before we attest to this live?
is my needle floating in my
It's a needle floating,
VGIs?
darling.
No, I think look, thank you, Sam, for having me on your channel, and I can't wait to have you on my for those of you watching, I interviewed Sam months ago on my
Yes,
channel,
darling.
but I haven't uploaded it for some reason. I've been
But maybe the audio was bad. I remember when we started and it was like a little echo, and
the audio was fine. Like
Yeah.
I've almost finished editing it. It just keeps ending up on the last thing of my like new things will end up coming up that I have to do more
Sure.
urgently. So it is on my list, and I promise I will publish it very, very soon. But I can't wait to share that because it is a great interview. I've just been really slow and I've slacked at getting it up. So I
that's perfectly
apologize,
okay.
Sam.
Oh, that's quite all right.
But thank you for having me on, and yeah, hopefully we can do this again soon.
Yes, and thank you very much for having been here and chatting with me. Have a little chin wag. So here's our last little comment. Thank you both. Yes, indeed. And thank you everybody who was watching, who gave us some comments, some interesting questions, who have subscribed. And with that, I wish everybody a most marvelous and excellent day. Goodbye.